Hello, my name is Cameron Grant and I'm here to present my assignment 8. My student number is 740-85375. The initial question that I came up with is, what impacts has the role of photojournalism in war photography made to society, and how have they been represented in the media over time? I feel that by looking at a variety of different photographers from my initial research throughout history has allowed me to see how the media has represented this through a variety of different resources from primary and secondary sources. I feel it's necessary to show the true depiction of an image and whether it goes on to actually being used as propaganda or is actually represented in the media. This may be not the case because it may be too gory and thus not published in, say, newspapers or magazines. For example, with John Malaki's photographs of the Boston bombings. I will go on to talk about my secondary and primary resources and how reliable they were. Some examples of my secondary resources from the books I have used was those of Alfred Einstein's VJ Day Kiss in Times Square. One technological factor which has influenced this is the way that it's represented. It was actually originally portrayed as a wartime photograph itself, however, from further analysis, has actually been deemed a sexual assault by many photographers and bloggers online. However, this was not actually originally the case and the intended effect of the photographer. The media has therefore created a negative impression of this photograph and shows how technology can influence the way an image is portrayed, especially that of social media. These new formats have much allowed photographers to not only present work online, but also prove that sometimes it's not what meets the eye. Another image was a US Marine taken by Balazs Gardy in 2010. This has also shown how technology has influenced the way cameras are used. He actually only used a mobile phone himself, and it shows how photographers in war photojournalism can actually get right up close into the action, as some were actually injured in its original intent. It gives them new opportunities to take the image, but can be manipulated by the government, which I'll go on to talk about itself. Some of the key quotes that I got were reliable. However, my secondary resources compared to the primary research that I conducted was not as reliable due to the fact that they had opinions and were heavily influenced by other social media formats. The work of photographers does not show how risky the actual war photojournalism photographs are, which is one factor that may not be taken into consideration. However, the media may have represented this by using images online or through newspapers and magazines and talked about it further to discuss the effects it has not only on us but the influences that they have had over time. The secondary resources I looked at were newspaper articles online such as The Times and the Daily Mail, the Telegraph also. These included books as well that I've referenced. They also go on to detail how conflict is represented in the photograph and is a much more reliable medium than that compared to in the previous 19th century impressions of canvas art, where actually Robert Capa and Alexander Gardner went on to work and become very well known in the Crimean War. So that's my secondary resources. My primary resource was conducted in the Imperial War Museum. I felt this expanded my knowledge on not only photography but the history of war over time from the 19th century, both world wars in particular, and showed how the media had both represented it but also represented it in a more negative way by using its propaganda to influence the public and society at the time, such as the political effects that maybe the presidents and prime ministers had on the photographs and the say that they had over them and when they actually originally published compared to the original intent. It supported how they may be manipulated by using as propaganda, such as those by Joe Rosenthal, and goes on to reflect the impression that they may get in the media compared to the original intent of the photograph and how they represent conflict. Again, some not being published because they were too gory and violent. The first slide I looked at reflects what impact this may have had on society. The second I will go on to show you represents the media that have influenced this, such as propaganda, posters, newspaper articles, magazines, political cartoons, even that photographers have maybe taken a picture and they've influenced the way that they're represented. The third slide that I will look at, which I will show you, is more modern take on more photojournalism, which reflects society's reactions today compared to those in the past. So this was one example that I looked at in the Daily Sketch. These are all in the Imperial War Museum in London. This is my second slide, and it's just showing how they are represented. And this is the third slide during the conflict in Ireland, which shows a much closer impression as to the war that conflict not only represents in the media, but also how it affects society and people at the time, capturing a much closer impression than that of previous examples. So in conclusion, I felt that my primary resource was a lot more reliable, and it gave me a more expanded knowledge on not only photography but war over time from the 19th century to more modern examples, and it reflects how many factors in relation to the context have influenced the way a photograph is perceived. In relation to the context itself, I feel that when an image is taken at that particular time, it may go on to create a bigger impact than originally intended, such as those of John Rosenthal's in World War II and John Tolumanaki. Also William van der Wert's images, one image which by himself in 1940 called Margaret Curtis went on to save her life and provide the necessary surgery she needed. Therefore, positive effect the media have actually published a photograph and actually saving a life. Again, depending on the period that the time is taken, it may have a different effect on society, on the audience and viewers and how they perceive it, compared to how, say, 20 years later it's perceived and the influence that the media has had on it, such as the first photographs talked about, such as VJ Day Kiss. Both resources provided a variety of different works and images, which backed up by the quotes I looked at, and images themselves on magazines and newspapers to support the context when relating back to the question and how the media have interpreted it compared to how it is initially interpreted. I feel that overall the media itself can have a positive and negative effect on the way a photograph is actually perceived, and throughout my research has provided me the necessary means to support the question and how war photojournalism can not only affect us but how it affects the way images are shown on social media, in newspapers, online, or by actually talked about by the photographer themselves to say why they've taken it and the images that are actually why they're used to represent it and what effect it may have on us. Sometimes being unpublished again because of being too gory, or maybe even being published just to take action and further give us knowledge that, such as those in the World War, that our loved ones are out there fighting a battle for us, and maybe even use propaganda just to support the war effort in a more positive light. Again, the media can have positive and negative effects on the way photographs are actually looked at and perceived, both online and in books and resources, and I feel that the variety of different resources that I've used does represent this and relates back to the question. Thank you for watching.